The 90s had better period dramas than anything on Netflix right now. The BBC made a medieval show with Daniel Craig, shot inside Catherine the Great's actual palace, and spent millions on period dramas you've completely forgotten existed. Back in the 90s, PBS did a miniseries of Dickens's last novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. Here's the problem with adapting that book. Dickens died before he finished it. Nobody knows who done it because he never wrote the ending. The story's about John Jasper, a London choirmaster who's secretly obsessed with his ward Rosa and his nephew Edwin. Edwin disappears, foul play is suspected, and that's where Dickens stopped writing. The casting choice for Jasper was wild. They got Robert Powell, who was famous for playing Jesus in a 70s miniseries. By 1993, his career had cooled off, and suddenly here he is playing a jealous, drug-addicted choirmaster who might be a murderer. People thought it was stunt casting at first, get the guy who played Jesus to play the villain, but Powell actually committed to it. His performance as this opium-smoking, obsessive character was honestly unsettling. Jonathan Pryce co-starred, the production values were solid, but the whole thing was still handicapped by the fact that the source material has no ending. In 1992, ABC tried to make an American-British co-production about medieval England. The show was called Covington Cross, and the creator, Gil Grant, literally described it as Bonanza in the Middle Ages. It's centered on this knight, Sir Thomas Grey, and his family dealing with medieval life in 14th century Lancashire. The whole thing was supposed to be a family adventure show. Very wholesome, very Sunday evening viewing. ABC gave it a Sunday time slot and started airing it, and then Ross Perot happened. Ross Perot was running for president in 1992, and he bought airtime to broadcast his campaign speeches. ABC kept having to delay or move Covington Cross episodes to make room for Perot talking about the economy and deficits. The audience couldn't figure out when the show was actually on anymore. 6 episodes, that's all it got before ABC canceled it. A medieval family drama got killed by a billionaire's presidential campaign speeches. The show's completely forgotten now, but there's one detail that's kind of amazing. A 24-year-old Daniel Craig appears in the pilot as a guard with one line. One line, then he disappears. Years before Bond, before any of that, he was a background medieval guard on a show that Ross Perot accidentally destroyed. 2 years later, ITV did a miniseries based on a Catherine Cookson novel called The Cinder Path. This one's dark. It's set in rural Northumberland in 1913, and it opens with a farmhand named Charlie accidentally killing his abusive father. Charlie keeps it secret, inherits the farm, and tries to move on with his life. But the past doesn't stay buried, and the whole thing spirals into this grim melodrama that eventually pulls in World War I. The show was part Catherine Cookson family saga, part wartime tragedy. Not exactly light Sunday viewing, but ITV loved that kind of thing in the 90s. In 1996, ITV and BBC co-produced a 4-part adaptation of Defoe's Moll Flanders. Alex Kingston starred as Moll, this incredibly resourceful 18th century woman who does basically everything. Marries for money, becomes a criminal, commits bigamy, all while searching for her lost mother. The miniseries covered the whole sprawling novel, from Newgate Prison to a Virginia plantation. Kingston played Moll with energy and ambition that made the character work even when she's doing terrible things. And Daniel Craig shows up again. This time he's not a one-line guard, he plays Jimmy, Moll's lover. Still years before he became Bond, but at least he got an actual role this time instead of standing in the background of a medieval castle. The adaptation was praised for capturing the novel's picaresque scope, and Kingston's performance is apparently the main reason people remember it at all. It's 1991. The Soviet Union's falling apart, and for the first time, Western film crews can actually get into the palaces. Turner Pictures saw that window and jumped on it. They're making a mini-series about Catherine the Great, and they're shooting in the actual Winter Palace in Leningrad. Palaces in Tallinn and St. Petersburg. $8 million budget. Julia Ormond plays young Catherine. There's also Vanessa Redgrave, Christopher Plummer, Maximilian Schell, Franco Nero. The cast is loaded. People magazine loved it when it aired, called it a grand pageant. Nobody was doing that scale for TV at the time, and the timing of it, shooting in Soviet palaces right before everything collapsed. It's this weird historical moment that got captured on film. BBC adapts Edith Wharton's unfinished novel. 4 American heiresses in 1870s London trying to marry British aristocrats, Emmy-winning costumes, big production. It airs, and Wharton fans absolutely lose it. The screenwriter gave it this romantic happy ending where the main character rides off into the sunset with her love interest, which is the exact opposite of how Edith Wharton ended every single one of her novels. She wrote these realistic, solemn endings where nobody gets a fairy tale. Letters poured into the BBC. Wharton scholars were furious. People accused them of selling out to Hollywood. The show had added gay characters, played up the romance, and then capped it with this ending that felt completely wrong for Wharton's voice. The controversy killed it. Bad ratings, impossible to find now, basically forgotten except by a handful of people who watched it back then. BBC tackles Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. The novel's 1,400 pages long, written in 1748, all done through letters. It's about a woman whose family's forcing her into marriage and a rake named Lovelace who's obsessed with her. Saskia Wickham plays Clarissa. Sean Bean plays Lovelace. The entire cast read the whole 1,400-page novel before filming. Sean Bean talked about it later, said they all committed to reading Richardson's book cover to cover because they wanted to get it right. The story works because Clarissa and Lovelace are basically the same person. He's proud of being England's best rake. She's proud of her purity and independence. Neither one will bend. He could probably be a good husband if he tried, but he won't give up his reputation. She won't compromise her principles. So they just destroy each other. It's only 3 episodes, so they had to cut a lot. But what's left is this intense psychological battle between 2 people who are perfectly matched in the worst possible way. 6-part Dickens adaptation. Paul Scofield plays 2 roles. Old Martin and his brother Anthony. The story's about young Martin running off to America to escape his greedy family, getting scammed by a corrupt insurance broker. First episode is 85 minutes, the rest are an hour each. Tom Wilkinson's in it, bunch of great British character actors, but it's really Paul Scofield's show. Dickens wrote it as satire, and the adaptation doesn't pull punches. It leans into the greed, the hypocrisy, all of it. Scofield just commands everything. If you've never seen Paul Scofield work, this is it. He's in his 70s, playing 2 completely different characters with a level of control that's just extraordinary. It aired on Masterpiece Theater, got praised for the production quality and dark humor. There was this show in 1995 called Bramwell where Gemma Redgrave had to saw through a leg of pork for hours under hot studio lights. They were filming a train crash scene at an abandoned London tube station, and to make the amputation look real, they made her actually hack through meat instead of using a dummy. She said later the whole thing reeked of authenticity, which is both disgusting and kind of impressive. Bramwell was about Eleanor Bramwell, a female doctor running a free hospital for the poor in 1890s London. The whole premise was showing what that meant. Being a woman trying to practice medicine when Victorian society didn't think women should be doctors. The first 3 seasons were really well done. Good writing, strong performances, beautiful period detail. Then season 4 happened and it just fell apart. The quality dropped so dramatically that even fans of the show will tell you to pretend it ended after season 3. Nobody's entirely sure what went wrong in production, but something clearly did. It's a shame because the first 3 seasons were excellent. 3 years before Jennifer Ely became Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, she starred in this Channel 4 miniseries. The story was set in August 1939, 5 cousins spending their last carefree summer together at their aunt's seaside house in Cornwall before World War II kicks off. The miniseries didn't stop there, though. It followed these characters through the war years and into the aftermath, showing how their lives got tangled up with each other. The miniseries mixed romance with class tensions and this dark comedy that gave it a different feel from typical period dramas. It got nominated for a BAFTA for Best Drama. People who watched it in the 90s still remember it fondly, but it's been mostly forgotten since then. In 1997, the BBC adapted Tom Jones, Henry Fielding's 18th century novel, and they leaned hard into the bawdy humor and sex. Max Beasley played Tom, a charming bastard who was born to a serving woman but got raised by a wealthy landowner. He falls for the neighbor's daughter, played by Samantha Morton, and the 5 episodes follow him screwing up repeatedly while chasing after her. What the adaptation did that was clever was having Henry Fielding himself narrate the whole thing. John Sessions played Fielding, and he's commenting on his own creation as the story unfolds. It gave the series this meta quality that worked really well. What made this version stand out was that having 5 episodes instead of a 2-hour film meant they could really dig into Fielding's characters. And those characters have enough depth that you don't mind spending time with them. From 1998 to 2003, ITV produced a series of 8 films about Horatio Hornblower, a Royal Navy officer during the Napoleonic Wars. These were based on C.S. Forrester's novels. Ioan Griffith played Hornblower, starting as a midshipman and working his way up to captain over the course of the films. Here's what's crazy about this production. They actually built a full-size tall ship frigate to film the naval scenes. Not a partial set or a model, an actual working period ship. They launched it in 1997 and called it the Grand Turk. The ship still exists today. They shot on location in the Mediterranean and around England, and the production values were surprisingly high for a television series. The sets and costumes were detailed, they paid real attention to getting the period right, and the naval battles were gripping because they'd committed to using an actual ship instead of faking everything. There were some spots where you could see budget limitations. A few weak special effects here and there, but overall it held up because they'd gone to the trouble of doing it properly. This one is about 2 sisters in 1920s London who take over their late father's dressmaking business and turn it into a fashion house. The show was created by Jean Marsh and Eileen Atkins, who'd both worked on Upstairs, Downstairs, so they really knew how to do period drama. And they made this thing look gorgeous. The costumes, the sets, the vintage cars, all the antiques. The 1920s is just a beautiful era to recreate on screen, and the designers working on this must have been having the time of their lives. By 1991, most British dramas had moved to shooting on film with single cameras. That was the standard. But The House of Eliott was shot using multi-camera video in studios, which was how the BBC used to make everything back in the 70s and early 80s. This ended up being one of the last BBC dramas ever shot that way. So it has this specific look to it that's different from other period dramas of that era. You can kind of tell it was made using an older technique. But the fans didn't care because the show had great storylines and real heart to it. The show ran for 3 seasons and became popular enough that French and Saunders did a parody of it called House of Idiot. 4 years later, the BBC adapted a comic novel by Stella Gibbons. Kate Beckinsale played Flora, a bright young woman who gets orphaned and has to go live with her deranged relatives on a gloomy farm in Sussex, and then she just systematically fixes all their problems. The cast was stacked. Joanna Lumley, Ian McKellen, Eileen Atkins, Rufus Sewell, and it was directed by John Schlesinger, who'd spent years in Hollywood making films like Marathon Man and Midnight Cowboy. This turned out to be his last British film. What makes Cold Comfort Farm work is that Flora isn't some magical character who fixes things through charm or love of life. She's just extremely practical in this very English way. She looks at misery like it's a mess that needs to be cleaned up and then goes about cleaning it up. The humor gets pretty dark and cutting at times, but the whole thing is really well crafted and quotable if you've seen it, and Beckinsale early in her career is just excellent as a problem solver. In 1998, the BBC did a 4-part adaptation of Dickens's Our Mutual Friend. Set in 1860s London, it's about a miser's fortune and all these lovers whose lives get tangled up in the inheritance. The cast included Keeley Hawes, Paul McGann, Anna Friel, and Ian Holm. What made this production really stand out was the scale of it. They used authentic period ships and real historical locations. There's a boating excursion scene in episode 3, and they used an actual vintage paddle steamer from the 1800s. They found a real Victorian ship and filmed on it. That level of production detail was the kind of thing the BBC was still willing to spend serious money on in the late 90s, and the writing and acting matched that ambition. The New York Times said the entire cast gets the characters right, which for a Dickens adaptation is actually high praise. The series ended up winning the BAFTA for Best Drama Serial in 1999.